Welcome back to Live Mike. I'm Lee Lonsberry. Nicole Witt is my guest on the line. I let you know before the break that we were going to be talking about the impact that this coronavirus is having on the adoption process. So many parents out there looking to have a little baby of their own or a child, either unable to have their own or whatever the circumstance may be. And, well, that process requires certain movements, certain interactions with people, certain behavior, which has all been discouraged in light of the coronavirus with social distancing directives in place and stay home, stay safe, as we've heard here in Utah from the governor. Well, that does not mean that the process of adoption has come to a screeching halt. There are a number of ways that folks seeking to become parents through an adoption process have found to circumvent and to overcome the challenges posed by this COVID-19. And an expert on all of that joins me on the phone now, Nicole Witt, Executive Director of the Adoption Consultancy. Nicole, grateful to you for your time. Tell me straight out, what's been the biggest impact on the adoption or what's been the biggest impact on the adoption process by this COVID-19 circumstance?
Well, the biggest impact, as it has been in all areas of life, is, the lack of in-person interaction that can happen. And that's really taken a lot of different forms throughout the adoption process, from home studies to potential birth parents and hopeful adoptive parents building relationships to, the potential birth mom not being allowed to have anybody in the hospital with her, to travel restrictions. So it's the impact of all that inability to just interact with other people is really kind of spreading throughout the entire process.
That's a good place to start. Maybe describe for us briefly the overall process. A pair of parents or an individual or someone, a prospective adoptive person, chooses to go down this path. What are the various instances where they would interact with people? Would be an interview, I presume,
one of the early steps is that they have to have something that's called a home study, and that requires, a lot of paperwork that they have to fill out, but it also requires, things like having to go to a government office to get, fingerprints done and background checks, and it involves having a social worker come to your home to make sure you can provide a safe environment for a child. So those are some of the very early interactions, that have been disrupted by this. The good news is, everything is going forward with adoption. It's just that people are finding creative ways to work around all of the different steps in the process that have been impacted.
Talk to me a bit about some of those creative workarounds that you've experienced.
Well, I think one of the most creative ones kind of comes more on the back end of it. So jumping to that a little bit is when it comes to when the baby is born. So a lot of times the adoptive parents are traveling from another state to where the baby's born. So obviously, not being able to or wanting to fly or stay in a hotel or eat at restaurants, things like that. So one of the most creative solutions, I've seen my clients starting to rent RVs for that trip, which has worked out great because, nobody else is renting RVs right now, so the prices are good and the dates are flexible and they can sanitize the whole thing and they can cook and nobody else has to come in, and they can just sort of, live in that, drive however far across the country they need to drive and stay there, until it's safe to go home. And so that's been a really creative solution. And, I think it's one that might stick around even after this pandemic passes because it does offer a lot of benefits.
That's absolutely fascinating. And imagine the story. Imagine the story that family will share forever. This pandemic, is breaking a lot of hearts and it's threatening out a lot of people's livelihoods and such, and it has caused certainly a massive inconvenience. But imagine being able to, as a family, have in your personal archive the foundational story, which at its core was a story of triumph, overcoming difficult circumstances, finding a creative way around the challenges that you're presented, and being able to come together in the midst of that. That's an admirable thing. I kind of like that a lot. In fact, what I might want to do, might ask you afterwards if I could put you in touch with producer Amy a little bit more. Maybe you could help us track down one of these families and we could talk about the experience that they have had using an RV as a workaround.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
What has every problem been solved? Are there still challenges in the process? Are there things that are being damaged or hurt or injured or by this coronavirus deal?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say every problem has been solved because everything's still changing, on practically a daily basis. So, suddenly, one day a hospital might allow one visitor with the expectant mom, and the next day they might allow 0 visitors, right? So every day it kind of seems like there's a new challenge coming up. But really, to everybody I've seen involved in the process is really stepping up from, judges allowing attorneys to appear from home instead of needing to come into their courtroom, to allowing, virtual notarizing of documents. And, everybody's just trying to figure out a way. Every time there's a new obstacle, there seems to be a new solution. So it really has been a very positive and encouraging thing to witness. I think it's, of course, causing a lot of stress, especially for the hopeful adoptive parents, who feel like every step of the way there's sort of been another obstacle for them. But it really is encouraging to see the community coming together and solving every problem as they arise.
That's admirable. That's inspiring. That's very cool. Listen, Nicole Witt, Executive Director of the Adoption Consultancy, I'm grateful to you for your time. I'm grateful to you for the service you render to these would-be families, ultimately leading them towards the family unit they crave. You're doing a wonderful service, and thank you for your information here today.
Oh, no problem, and please stay safely.
100%. You do the same. Listen, we're going to take a break here in a moment. We are standing by awaiting Governor Gary Herbert, Superintendent Sid Dixon, along with State Epidemiologist Dr. Angela Dunn. They're all going to give their respective updates. We have, unfortunately, had to report here on these airwaves that the number of deaths here in the state of Utah attributable to the coronavirus has increased by 1. Now, there have been 19 Utahns to have lost their lives to the coronavirus. It's a heartbreaking thing. There are other updates and details in terms of numbers Dr. Angela Dunn will outline. We're also going to hear about how the public and charter schools here throughout the state will operate for the remainder of the school year. Will class be back in session, or will that be it for the year? See you in the fall, kids. We'll find out next on Live Mike. I'm Lee Lonsberry, and this is KSL News Radio.